The digital transition. The Digital Transition, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to the Digital Transition, podcast number 30, and our final episode for 2020. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm talking with Dr Marzia Bolpagni from Mace about the shift from LOD to level of information need. Before I talk to Marzia, I need to talk to you about our exclusive sponsor, NBS. Their NBS Chorus product enables a collaborative management of your specification and can be directly linked to your building model, allowing you to increase your productivity and reduce risk with a single point of truth. To learn more about NBS, head to their website, www.thenbs.com.au. Now on with the show. Thanks for coming back and taking the time to share more of your knowledge about LOD, my favourite thing, or level of information need, as we now call it, Marzia. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Very happy to be back.
So firstly, Marzia, now for the listeners that haven't listened to our previous discussion, and I would actually be completely disappointed for listeners that haven't listened to it yet, because it is one of my favourite topics, which is actually back at episode 5 for those that haven't listened to it, where we talked about LOD or level of detail. Can you let our listeners that haven't listened to episode 5 yet know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Marzia Bolpagni, and I work in London for Mace on digital innovation, building information modeling, and I help clients to set their digital strategies and to deploy them both in the public and private sector, not just in the UK, but international level. And one of my favorite topic is what it was the LOD, and now we have this concept of the level of information needed to discuss together today. And I'm leading a group of experts at European level on this topic, and also working at international level on standardization, and also involved in other activities. Really passionate about innovation in our sector on the topic of terminology. So I'm assistant editor of the BIM Dictionary. That is part of the BIM Excellence Initiative. Also, I invite everyone to have a look to the BIM Dictionary. It's been translated in 25 languages so far. And also working as ambassador of the UK BIM Alliance. And as you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from Italy. And I created a group of Italians that work in the UK. It's called Italian Digital Transformation UK. So a lot of different activities. Last one that I want to also underline, I'm also really, really keen on linking academia and industry. So I enjoy, working with students and research in general.
Now, one of the things that I think that you left out, which is probably a very important point, is that you're actually one of the most educated guests that I've actually had on my podcast. And you're actually a doctor. You've done your PhD specifically on level of detail and to kind of update it to level of information need. So you are the expert globally in this topic in terms of understanding all of this.
I started my career in research, and I wanted really to understand how we can improve how we define information and how we exchange information. So I did a PhD at Politecnico di Milano in Italy, and during my PhD, I've been working with some of the most advanced client organization. So in Boston with Massachusetts Port Authority. And then in London with the Minister of Justice. So really working with the industry to find innovative solution and to improve the way that we define our specification when we deal with the building information modeling. Yeah.
So similar to all my other guests that I speak to, have a very strong passion for making industry better. But Also, for our guests that have neglected to listen to episode 5, do you just want to give us a short explanation about the company that you work for in Mace?
Yeah, sure. I'm really glad to work for Mace because they as a company, Mace is an international consultancy and construction company, really that founded for on exceptional people and they want to deliver excellence for our clients and shaping a community, sustainable community. We also committed to be zero net carbon company in the next years. And so also we are active, as I say, in international level in 5 different hubs, also in Australia, where you are speaking today, Nathan. So there is this spirit, and our mission is always to find a better way of delivering things. So if you've ever been in London, Mace has been the company that built the London Eye or the Shard from Renzo Piano, so quite iconic project. Also, we are working a lot on moving from construction to production with innovative solution. With the Build Factory, we are working in different sectors from data centers, infrastructure, pharmaceutical, public sector, and so on. So really, we cover a lot of different industries.
Yeah, it was exciting hearing the story of Mace when we talked last year. But now today our discussion, I think, from my perspective, I think it's actually a pretty important one because it's a continuation of the discussion we had back in 2019. Now, I find this topic of LOD, or level of detail, to be very controversial. And I think it's reason why it's controversial is because it's not very well understood. And that's why we see the challenges we see in the way it's specified or requested from either our asset owners or our BIM advisors and information managers. Back in April 2019, we discussed your work on the topic. And at that point in time, ISO 19650.1 2018 had just been released. This standard introduced a new term, which is one that you introduced or discussed just as part of our introduction, which is level of information need. This standard within the whole concept of level of information need talks about the availability of different metrics that can be used by industry to explain geometry and information requirements. Now, as I stated a bit earlier, these metrics are, in my opinion, in terms of what's available at market today, are not very well used by industry, and hence the confusion. And that's my opinion. I remember as part of our discussion and a big portion of your PhD research was not able to be released because of the work that you were doing about this that might be included in this new potential solution to actually help solve this potential problem. Today, I'd like to really kind of touch base or talk to you about a new standard that's out there, a new standard that you have been part of a committee over in Europe to develop called EN 17412.1, Building Information Modelling, Level of Information Need, Part 1, Concepts and Principles. It's great. The other week I was talking to Lars Christian Freudelin about some other standards that have come out about the use of how we can standardize information. And it's great to see that we've seen those 2 new standards released this year. What is this new standard that's just been released? How can this standard, what is it about and what's its purpose?
As you say, there is a lot of confusion in the industry around this topic, and it's not really working how we specify information. And I advise everyone to go back to the episode 5 where we had a great talk, and I also received a great feedback about that podcast. So I think it was really a success. So what is new with this standard? So how we specify information? So currently it's not easy to get what we want, okay? We produce information and maybe it's too much or too little to achieve what we want. This standard is putting us in the perspective where we can achieve a scenario when we are able to get the information that really are relevant for us to make informed decision. So what is called information management. So all the standard on the ISO 19650 series, but in general, information management is really to be more effective and efficient in how we deal with information. So this standard at European level, we wanted to standardize this concept around defining how much information we include in our deliverables, in our models. So the level of information need, I want to start with the definition. So it's a framework which define the extent and the granularity of information. And the purpose of the level of information need is to prevent the delivery of too much information. So there is this concept of avoiding waste. So not just the waste of the physical thing, but also waste of information. So we need to be mindful and to treat data as an asset, okay? As something valuable that can bring us money. So, and if we don't specify in a precise way what we really need and what is give us value, that we are not really working in an efficient way. So these standards is there to help different parties, both who is to everyone that is asking for information. It can be the asset owner, it can be the designer, the main contractor, but really everyone involved to specify how the information should be required. So currently, how we work, we have. We ask, for example, for a particular phase, I would like, during design, I would like for my model or for specific elements, I would like to have LOG, 300 and so on. And we put in a sort of requirements, these sort of numbers. But how then, as a designer, for example, we can translate that number with actually the information that we need. Is that there is a gap, there is a big gap between how we define the information and how then we specify, and then how we check those. So this standard is really to help people to define better their information. And there are three different aspects. So one is regarding to the geometrical information, and there are different aspects that are related to geometry. So the first is the detail. Okay, so how much detail we put in our geometrical representation. And we know that is a continuum range, okay, especially, for the architects that are listening to us today. We know that is not like a fixed category that is, simplified, medium, and then high. What does it mean? What we mean when we say, I want a model that is low detail? If we ask 10 experts in the room, they will answer in 10 different ways, isn't it, Nathan?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, again, with the detail, what we would like to get from this geometry. And we need to explain to people that also all the experts that are listening to us and those people that instead they don't model themselves, they know that there is a cost associated to the effort that we put in creating the geometrical detail, okay? Because if you want to go to fabrication and to want really high level of detail, then of course is related also different cost. That maybe if you just want to do quantity takeoff and then you just want to know there is an object there, you don't care really on the particular geometry. The second aspect of the geometrical information is the dimensionality. Do we want information to be representing everything in 3D? Or some information are also in 2D? Other instead maybe are aligned, especially when we think about the schematics. Maybe there are some needs at the beginning of the project that some representation are represented with a line, but still that line can be searchable and can be measured. Another aspect is the location. So do we want our object in our models to be, do we want the geolocation of our object, or the location is relative? So just we want to say that we want an object, for example, in that space, okay? It's not that we want, for example, that chair is exactly in that geolocation. Another aspect of the geometry is the appearance, how it look like. Again, for people that are listening to us, we know that if we want to have a realistic appearance, then maybe you put a lot of effort on that. But maybe for some uses, we want to have a symbolic appearance. So, for example, think about hot and cold water. Okay, so you don't want the pipe to be with a realistic appearance. And the final one is the parametric behavior of the geometry, how the geometry can be modified, something that the geometry can be parametric, so there is a possibility to change the geometry later on or not. So this is a sort of providing a language to specify your requirements for the geometrical information. Another aspect is the alphanumerical information, and is easier. So which are the different attributes, the different properties that you need. And then the last one is the documentation, which documentation you need in order to achieve your job. I want just to add a last remark on this. All these level of information in the framework should be linked to what is called a prerequisite, okay, that create a context. First of all, what we were discussing also last time in the episode 5, the purpose. The purpose is really, really driving the need, okay? Because if we want to do energy analysis and then we want to do rendering, then how we define the information and the information that we need are completely different. And then also the when, so when we need the information, because maybe for the same purpose, a different point of time, we need a different requirements. Think about, cost analysis. Maybe at the beginning we need less information because less are available. And later on, when we do an advanced and more detailed cost analysis, then we need more information. And then also the actor, so who needs to provide the information, and finally the object. With the object, again, I remarked it doesn't mean that it's the element. It is flexible, can be the system. So maybe you define your information at system level. You can define for the entire building or entire infrastructure, and so on. So that is important to have also these prerequisites defined.
Wow. That was a Reader's Digest version, Marzia. That was pretty impressive. But so we've got another new standard. And before I start asking you questions about the more pointy questions, I want to probably start at the top end first before we start getting into a bit more detail. We have an existing standard series. So we've got our ISO series of 19650. And we have the terminology of level information need outlined in the first part of that standard series. And it talks about the metrics that can be put in place, the existing metrics that can be put in place. How does this new standard fit in with the ISO 19650 suite?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I want to say that for the first time, the term and the definition level of information need has been included in the ISO 19650 part 1. So you can find also in the paragraph 11.2, an extended text that is covering the level of information need. So the European work really is aligned with this work, and it further develop what is included at international level. If you read the ISO 19650, the first thing that is mentioned is that the level of information need of each information deliverable should be determined according to its purpose. So what does it mean? That you cannot define your information requirements, so your level of information need, without first saying why you need the information, the purpose. That is a big change, okay? So it's not enough to say, I would like, LOD 300. You say, okay, why you need the information? Okay, first think about what you want to achieve. And then there are other topics that are underlined in the paragraph in the ISO regarding the level of information need. There is this concept of having just the information that is needed and not more. There is also, they say there that you need to be careful in importing automatically objects from sources in your model, because this can introduce an higher level of information need that was required. So really the concepts are at ISO level in part 1 of the ISO 19650 are regarding, we want to avoid waste of information, and we want the definition of the level of information need to be purpose driven. And what is then in the European level that I was mentioning before is then to further detail how to specify the geometrical aspect, the alphanumerical aspect, but also the documentation. So if you have in front of you the standard, maybe you can also refer back to figure 11 when there is the description of the information management process. And in that diagram, you can see that the information is split in 3 different areas. So there is the documentation, alphanumerical information, and the geometrical information. And what is in the European level is really to give you, as I was saying, a language to specify those 3 different aspects that actually are in the ISO.
So it's essentially another piece of the puzzle, filling out and providing greater detail to industry and also asset owners to get a greater understanding, I guess, to try and remove those inconsistencies that we're facing right now. So, you know,
exactly.
we have the scenarios over in the US where we have the BIM Forum LOD spec, which is heavily used here in Australia as well. But then in the UK, with the introduction of 1190 BS 1192, which has now been retracted, you introduced LOD for level of detail to explain geometry, and then LOI, which explained level of information, which was attached to it, which had a single number integra that went from 1 to 7, I think, from what I can remember. Does this standard?
I think that you remember well.
Does this new standard essentially supersede any of these other LOD, LOI descriptors, or does it set a framework to then use those existing standards that are out there?
I think that we don't have, as always, to throw away the good work that has been done in the past. But what is important is to reflect, and all of us to be critical thinker and to say, are we really doing the right way? Is this, clear? Is it effective? Having just generic numbers is putting you also in danger. Also, if you think about a legal framework. So if we specify, I would like LOD 500 according to BIM Forum, if you read actually the LOD specification of the BIM Forum, LOD 500 is not there at all.
It doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't exist. So, where is this LOD 500 described? Nowhere. Okay. So I think that it's somehow easy just to use these labels. But in reality, we need to be mindful and to understand if what is there in the standards that are already published and so on is really fit for purpose for us or not. And is it specific enough to make value of the information that are required? And if it is yes, go ahead and continue to use that. If not, you need to realize that when apply the ISO 19650, but in general, you want to get the information that they bring value to you. So for example, if you're interested to use the information for facility management later on, you need to understand how you do, first of all, facility management in your organization. So you need to go back to your processes and try to understand, okay, which are the information that I need in order to operate my asset, okay, to manage and operate my asset. And then you start from that. And then you start with the end in mind and say, great. So I ask since the beginning, Usually people that do operation and maintenance, they need to know where they asset they are, how big they are, if they are still under warranty, when they need to do operation and maintenance. These are, few information that is important that are captured because they are so important. One thing is also, if you think about the name of the space, that is something that usually we use during operation and maintenance, but is defined and agreed early on, by the designer at the beginning. So can we require a naming convention that actually can be used for operation and maintenance and is not just used for the design and the construction? So I think that is really, this framework is asking people to understand why they want the information and to treat information as an asset that can bring value to us.
Okay, so it doesn't supersede those existing standards, but it just raises the question to actually get people to think about what they're doing.
If you just say, I use the ISO 19650 and I continue to use LOD 300, then you are not really applying what is there, because then it's asking you to define the purpose why you need the information. So first of all, you need to say, okay, great, I want to do just class detection and I want, this geometrical information. And maybe you can refer back to some work that it is maybe already published somewhere, but you need to be more specific.
We take this step, this new standards just released, and we've talked about the concepts, I guess, in and around how people have to be more descriptive about what they want. So let's role play a couple of scenarios here and let's start off in the early phases. I think the first thing that I guess is, we talk about is reducing waste, and conversations like this tend to never happen at all, probably between consultants, or if they do, they're very kind of, or probably too heavily contractual. But let's talk through the scenario of the architect and the structural engineer, and the benefits that reading this standard might actually play in for them. What are your thoughts on how this would play out? So, for example, the architect is rushed on a Friday afternoon. They have all of their, depending upon your software platform, their views might be set up, or their layering systems may be set up to send out every single element that's in the project, including all of the furniture, because the interior designer has been working on it that week. So the model gets sent to the structural engineer. The structural engineer goes to open the model, and all the excess information's in there that's of zero relevance to them. Their interest is in, specific elements that are going to, add certain loads to the structure, or key architectural features in regards to the floor finishes or the floor or the columns, where the architect would like the columns to be before the structural engineer signs off on it. So a conversation value early on, really high. What's the benefits for an engineer or an architect to for either reading this standard or implementing it?
Yeah, I think that you describe perfectly what is happening in reality, and the reason why we have this standard now, because we want to avoid this situation of waste of energy and effort and created this conflict. So imagine a world where you open, instead you open your computer and then actually you have just the information that you need as an engineer to get started and to do your structural analysis. I was invited some time ago to a presentation of a new workflow, an innovative workflow for structural engineers to use models. And it's so funny because the first step that they mention is that, first of all, you need to clean up the model with all the elements that are not needed in order to do structural analysis. And I was like, wow, it's really, so efficient, this workflow, that the first thing that you need to do is to clean everything, because there is too much information that you don't need. These kind of things, can we improve the way that we exchange information? And in order to do that, you need to specify what you want as a structural engineers, having, as you say, Nathan, did this conversation early on to say, okay, I need to do structural analysis. And in order to do that, I need to have for example, the walls to be modeled in this way that you don't include also the structural element because it's something that I'm going to create myself, okay? Or I need to have information regarding the connection because then is where then I create my structural elements. Or maybe I need to have information regarding the materials of the wall because then is then have there is an impact for me to then calculate the different loads. Or I need to know where the function of that space, because based on different function, then in my regulation, I need to apply different values for the calculation of the different requirements that are there. We needed to use this framework to have this conversation later on and say, how you would like the geometry to look like. Do you need any geometry at all? That is a question, okay? And for example, appearance, I don't care about the appearance. So please don't spend time in creating nice looking good representation. No, but it just, you said that for that purpose, you can share your information early on because I don't care about the appearance for me. But then I care more about maybe some attributes that for me are relevant. And then so you work together, you say for structural analysis, I need that geometry, I need that properties and that alphanumerical information, and I need maybe that documentation, maybe some reports and so on. That's it, okay, and so that will be ideal. I really would like to work in an industry that is working in that way. Is the reason why, but this is not just the future. So maybe I think that we can also say something regarding practical implementation that are already there in the industry. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, you've just explained clearly. Well, both of us throughout our kind of monologues have probably explained quite clearly what the benefits for industry would be, because we see how much time is spent in handling excessive, irrelevant information and data. Say, for example, industry is in a position where it decides to still sit on its hands and not try to be proactive and implement these sorts of processes themselves. Is there a way, you think, in which asset owners could apply this new standard 17.4.12.1 at the start of their projects to try and achieve some greater efficiencies? Because once the industry recognize that they can save time, which means that they can save money, also means that could flow through to the asset owners in terms of being able to get better fee value from their consultants because they're delivering only what the client actually needs instead of just putting together additional information just because that's what they've always done. Because that seems to be the case, isn't it? Documentation standards are all people producing documents are just producing documents based upon what they've always done rather than actually having the conversation with the people they're handing it to and saying, what is it you really want? So can you envisage asset owners actually driving it?
Totally, yes. I mean, that is a great point. I was recently speaking with one of the main asset owner in a country. I will not say names, but it's so interesting because we were having this honest conversation, and because it's really important to move away from this Hollywood beam when everything is perfect and so on, but to be practical. And it was really interesting of this conversation, and this asset owner, they starting to require BIM almost 10 years ago. Okay, so quite advanced, and they realized recently that all the model that they receive are not fit for purpose. They cannot use any of those to do operation and maintenance. Isn't it a great waste?
Nothing like digital waste.
Exactly. It's a lot of digital waste. And so they realized that the way that they were requiring information that it was not working, okay? Because for different reasons. One thing is that because the specification were not possible to transfer automatically in the modeling tools, so it was really difficult to transfer those requirements. Another thing, it was a poor checking method, so they were receiving this information from the designer and the contractor, but they were not really checking in an effective way that what they received was compliant with their requirements. So they did this work to start from the beginning and rethink about what they really need for operation and maintenance. And they came with a shorter data set, sort of shorter requirements, but really digitize those requirements to make sure that what they ask, they receive, and they can use this information during the entire life cycle. So totally agree with what you were saying, that asset owner should really drive this, because it's not just a fashion that if you just ask for BIM, let designers and contractors and other parties in the supply chain to deliver this to you. Of course, they will implement models that they fit that purpose, okay? Because that can help during the design or that can help during the site, but they don't have the capabilities to understand what instead is relevant for the asset owner. So if asset owner, they want to get the most from this, they really need to specify which is the level of information need that they require for their point of view. And this is really there to help them. And we are also working on part 2 and part 3 at the same time. So part 2 is on the application. So where there is also you will find, for example, also a checklist of the different things that you need to follow when implementing this. And part 3 is on the data schema. So it's more like on the technical application then for different solution to be used. But it's something that you can start also now to implement the concept, the principle in part 1 without waiting for part 2 and 3, of course.
Is there a timeline for part 2 and 3? Do you know how far away they might be?
Yeah, I mean, standards always, take longer than what you expected. So I don't have really, I cannot promise. Usually it takes, a few years, but I think that is not something that needs to stop us to requiring information using constant principles that are in part 1, because really is important that if you want to work in a better way, we need to start defining our information requirements in a more efficient way.
So bearing in mind that we don't have access to, because they don't exist yet, the future parts that will come out as part of the standard, is there an ability for people that are listening to this podcast, once they've read the standard, being able to implement the standard within their practice? Is there an ability for them to start that journey now based upon this first part that's been released?
Yeah, sure. There is constant principle that can be applied. So really, in part 1, you can find an example in the annex. So it's already there, an example to show you how to implement. Mm-hmm. And in part 1, there are also different examples that is guiding you on that regard. And there are also different guidelines that are available. So also, I've been author of the UK one, so you can also find for free part D of the guidelines on the application of the ISO 19650, and where there is a chapter on the level of information need. Also, we have been working together also with Emma Hooper, that I want to thank again, also has been your host in another podcast, if I'm not wrong.
No, she was. She did definitely come on.
Yeah. And so we have been preparing a database that you can have a look, is available for free, as an example of the implementation of this framework. So really there is material available there on the implementation.
That's exciting. I want to rush out and do this straight away. So, Marzia, you've talked about the examples that are available through the UK BIM Alliance and the guidelines. Are there any other examples that you could probably talk about in terms that either informed this standard that you've been part of? Because obviously the research you've done at the start obviously informed this standard along with other experts in industry. Are there other examples either available or that you've actually been part of that might not be available that actually demonstrate this implementation?
Yeah, sure. It's important to say that is not just, my work and my effort, but there is a group of experts from, is a team of experts that has been shared what has been done in the past years in their countries, especially in this case in Europe. So there are great applications so far already that implement the concept and principle of the level of information need. So some of those I think that I want to mention, there are in Norway, that is the Statsbygg, that is the public owner, that they have been implementing this approach now, so defining their information in a better way, in a digital way, starting with the business needs. Also, we have good example also in Luxembourg, where they started with the different purposes. So what they need to achieve, and they produce also requirements that include the alphanumerical information that is also mapped, for example, with IFC has been a great work. So I advise everyone to have a look to that. So alphanumerical, geometrical, and documentation part. We have also other great example in Germany, in Belgium, in Czech Republic. Also, they are creating a database, so all the public projects should follow this approach of defining their information in a better way, as well as in Italy, taking into account the heritage sector, so understanding which are the information that you need to ask in order to take care of your restore and take care of your heritage assets. So it's not there are a lot of great work. There are also different tools that are available already in the market. So also on the technology side is great. I'm not here to sell any software, but if you are interested, you can get in touch, and there are really also application that is helping you to achieve that in a more digital way. But as a concept and principle, you can also apply there with the low tech. It's not, it's not that you need to invest on those tools. Of course, if you do that kind of investment, that you can have greater benefits.
What it demonstrates as an outcome from this is that if people in the supply chain, so let's starting at the asset owners level, and for asset owners that are listening to the podcast today, if they don't invest themselves up front in understanding and documenting what their level of information needs are, and yes, that involves a bit of effort and energy before a project starts, then there's a great opportunity that they may end up with information that's excessive and not to their needs, and actually cost them more than what it would have done otherwise.
Absolutely.
And hopefully for our consultants or contractors out there today that are listening, it gives them an opportunity for them to sit back and actually take a bit more notice about what information they need at what time and how it's delivered and how it's procured, to then therefore essentially lean up their processes to reduce excess digital waste and the time it takes to actually create, which is, sometimes it's quite excessive for some things. From my perspective, that's probably the key takeaway from this standard and our discussion today, and hopefully creating a little bit more certainty in and around the way in which asset owners or their representatives in information managers are creating the documentation suites for their AIRs and the EIRs for their clients in terms of what information actually needs to be delivered moving into the future. And I'm assuming that's the overall goal with this standard.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really is for everyone that is asking for information to have a framework to define better what they need.
Now, one cheeky question for you. Now, when you presented at Brisbane back in 2019, and you did so remotely from London, and there was a number of presentations I know you were doing around that time where you were using acronyms, and you introduced an acronym called LOIN. Now, talking to May Winfield about this a little while ago, she was saying, I've told Marzia she's got to stop using that acronym. Are you still using the acronyms, or what's the go?
No, that is funny. I mean, I received so many jokes for that, and but it's not my fault. I want to say to everyone that I didn't create the term level of information need. It was not myself.
No, actually, for me, it's
I don't know either. I think that people they want to start shorter, different terms to make it, instead of they are lazy in writing, so they want to have acronyms. And then there was my colleague from the UK. They told me, do you know, Marzia, really what LOIN means? And then when they explained me, I was like desperate about that. And there is one thing that industry people, they like to have acronyms, but in reality, and especially in this case, we know that how much acronym they can create confusion. Yes, one indeed. Is, the biggest one is BEAM. A lot of people, they put different meanings to that. And the same with LOIN. So there was, at the beginning, we were introducing in the first draft, but then it was a collective decision to remove that, because we don't want people to then move from LOD and then to say, oh, you just need to change the word with LOIN and then you continue the same way. It's not like that, okay? So it's not, you cannot say, I would like LOIN 300. What does it mean? It's not, it doesn't make any sense, okay? So is the reason why now we don't use any acronyms. So it's really about level of information need, but it really is about which information regarding the geometry do you need, which alphanumerical information do you need, which documentation you need. Is really because if we work in that way and we are better in specifying our information, then also we can allow a digital workflow where you are able to, first of all, to create information in a more accurate way, and then to check if what you get is what you wanted. Because if you ask, I would like LOD, as we were saying before, LOD 400, and then how can you check that what you get is LOD for 400? So difficult. If instead you say, I would like to have my walls with those properties because I need to achieve that particular purpose, that is, energy analysis, and then which is the data set that you need. So I need, for example, the transmittance values and so on, acoustic rating and so on. And then it is easier to check that what you receive actually includes what you were asking for. So no more acronyms.
Well, I had an interesting conversation with Don Cameron about that and the future of BIM in 5 years' time a couple of episodes ago, and we were talking about what new acronyms are going to be around, and my hate of acronyms. So it's very nice to see you're holding strong on this one and avoiding the acronyms. Now, I'm going to go back to something now, and it's the standard question, the standard final question I ask everyone. And the thing is, I haven't gone back and listened to your answer specifically, but I do enjoy comparing the experiences of experts in the industry and the difference of what this meaning means to them over a reasonable period of time, because as we're all aware, as time goes by, we learn more, but then as we learn more, we realize that we know less. So the more educated we become, that we realize that we actually don't know as much as we thought we knew. So as of today, Marzia, what does BIM mean to you?
It's funny because I didn't hear back what I answered last time, so it would be interesting to compare the two. But I think that the first things that comes to my mind is really about better information management. Is maybe something that I maybe answered the last time. But I think that after this time that, as I say, that you learn more, but also there are more things that maybe you want also to do to implement. I think that it's really about finding a way to define and produce and use information during the entire life cycle in a better way. what I want to underline this time is the ethical use of data and the security aspect. So I think that we need to work on that, on this direction. We are all excited about innovating our sector. And I'm passionate about that. I think that you understand that. But we needed to do in a way that digital is there to support the public good and not to instead be used against us. So also in the construction sector. So I see building information modeling that is important that we work in the direction where data are used to do more informed decision for the public good and not instead to be used to control us. Because that is not the word that we want to be. So maybe it can be a discussion for another podcast, maybe in the future, but I think that we needed to be mindful of that. And so to be able to do things in an easier way and to have more time to be spent for what we love.
Well, it sounds like you're promoting another one of my episodes with the conversation I had with Nathan Jones about secure BIM.
Really?
Yeah. Well, the other problem is that there are also clients out there that are just specifying project must be delivered in accordance with ISO 19650.5, and you just go, and they haven't done their part to actually advise what their requirements are. So it's very important that that's where they start. And I do believe your answer is different from last year, but I have managed to brainwash a lot of people and just get them all to convinced that better information management actually is the answer. But thank you very much for your time, Marzia.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. It's amazing. So speak to you next time.
So for more information on what Marzia and I discussed today, please head to our website for further reading and to get to the links to the standards and the guidelines from the BIM UK Alliance, I think it's called. This is our last podcast for 2020. So there won't be a podcast in a fortnight's time. So for those that are only just listening to this podcast now, you have the Christmas break to go back and listen to the whole back catalogue of the last 30 episodes. But until next year, good luck with your digital transition. For more information, or if you'd like to continue the discussion in the comments section, head over to our website, thedigitaltransition.com. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future podcasts. The Digital Transition.